Mm. Well, in my case, I didn't realize, but most things in life you don't realize. You sort of find yourself on a certain path, and you kind of incrementally progress, and that becomes your norm. And I always find this this is an interesting point. Like, you get a lot of retired sports people that hope to make a career out of kind of motivational speaking, especially to businesses. They go, it's a good pathway, and they tend to be good storytellers and have really good stories to tell. But the thing that I always find quite cringe is they often go like, I had to dedicate and sacrifice so much for my sport, and these are the lessons you should all learn from my sacrifice. The truth is, in 95% of the cases, none of us knew any different because you did it from so young that it was just your reality. So I had no frame of reference other than like doing extremely hard physical activity many times a week since I was 8 years old. And so I didn't know what normal life was. I wasn't sacrificing anything. That was all I'd ever done. And to be honest, it was all I ever cared about because I was blinkered. That's what I'd done. And people referred to me as that. So like, you often get this kind of athletes go to these talks with this kind of holier than now. See, I know how to dedicate myself and I'm disciplined and you guys aren't. You should learn from me. You're not disciplined. You've never had any change. It's like if you grew up in a single room house, it's not like you've chosen to downgrade, like you just, that's all you've ever known. So like, you know, it's not like at some point I was like 16 and someone goes, right, you can not do sport or you can do sport, but here's all the downside and here's the things that come with it. You just kind of, like with most things in life, you kind of just follow the path of least or medium resistance and think, oh, that's cool, that's not cool, I'll do that. And then before you know it, you're in so deep. Like, every day I'm killing myself on the track and I'm vomiting from effort, but I don't know any different. I didn't have any other choice, right? So I think it's probably often talked about in too much hyperbole. And the reality is, you kind of like, no matter what role you fall into in life, whether it's sport or in something, a lot of the times it wasn't through a conscious decision. It was just through like following the obvious next step. So I do, when you look back at it and you join the dots looking backwards, which is a Steve Jobs quote, yes, I realised that's what I was signing up for, but only now once you've done it, you can go back, well, of course it was going to be hard. And of course I was going to have to take all these setbacks and downsides. And I do think, the sort of mental health and especially the concussion stuff is a very interesting dynamic, and be interesting to see how that pans out over the coming years.
The motivational speaking thing is really interesting because I've done a bit of speaking myself and it's a part of what I do, and I've always cringed at that sort of part of it where you say, yes, I had to sacrifice it, and you're totally right, you were just in one mind. And when everyone says what did it feel like, and I go, well, honestly, what does your life feel like? I don't know what else to feel, right? It's just the thing that I was in. And ultimately you are kind of, I felt that I felt wrong to be offering advice on how to be disciplined, committed, and things like that when I was only siloed in a certain few activities, which was like, I know how to be disciplined really well at going to the gym, at getting training, like being really good on my diet, all of those sorts of things, which are ultimately good traits to have. But the transferable skill to take it to, say, like a corporate environment, I have now really had to learn. And the discipline and hard work that it takes to grow your business, to do the work that is not sport related, is totally different. It is not the same thing. And you, as someone who has been in the corporate world, you've built businesses, how have you found that? Did you find that it is a completely different system that you're pulling on, or did you transfer it over? Did you find you could do it easily?
So I think there is very clear transferable stuff, but it's actually not where you think it is, right? So, in my experience, right? So when I retired from the sport, and I'd already sort of dovetailed this startup, DNA Fit, co-founding the startup before I kind of finished the sport. So I never had time to take stock and think, what am I going to do next? Just as I mentioned before, you kind of just follow these paths, right? And before you know it, you're down one. and so, but after I'd had actually my first sort of exit. So after we built this business and 5 years later we sold it, I kind of had a little bit of time to take stock and think, whoa, 5 years ago I was an athlete and I was in this position, and now I've sold this business, millions of quid, and it's sort of like you take this sort of different view of things. And I remember at that point realizing, like, the reason I was good at this corporate stuff, at this like non-sport life, was absolutely because of my sport life, but it wasn't from the clear things of like discipline and You know, and there was something about handling pressure. I think there's a big factor in like resilience. Um, and one of my key sort of theses around like why sports people make good entrepreneurs and should embrace that more is this: in sport, it is basically nothing but failure and then punctuated by occasional success, right? You know, good session, great. Most sessions are not great, but you do it anyway. Lose a match, lose a race, and then you don't go, oh, I'm out of sport then. You know, like I'm not going to try that again. You go, okay, let's train more. You know, and that's something which, when you haven't gone through a sporting background, even if it was just recreational or amateur, is very hard to learn from a non-sport environment, right? Like, not getting a job doesn't mean, right, okay, now I'm just going to, you know, like I'm going to keep trying for that same job, right? You know, like it doesn't, you often tend to like move away or tangentially like change course in a non-sporting life. So I think that resilience thing is true, but the whole sort of self-discipline and stuff, like it was the softer skills that I find like I carried from sport into business life that were more effective than the hard stuff, the harder, like more tangible skills. So, you know, the ability to perform, and when I say perform, it like almost, you could talk about this in entertainment or acting as well. And that means when you're not entirely sure of yourself, like it might not be your realm of expertise and you're happy to walk into an important meeting or a room of people and tell them a story that ultimately ends up in them sort of purchasing something or buying something or coming along on a journey with you. I think sport gives you a lot of that, right? You don't know if you're going to perform well when you go out on the pitch or on the track, even if you've done loads of training. You're just like hoping you pull it off. And there's a kind of like, you know, performance to that, which is more than just the physical ability. And that's like that cognitive ability to just go out there and put it all out and hopefully it works out. And that, I think, is a really powerful skill in the corporate side. So whenever I see, you know, to your point, right, speaking to businesses, the best thing sports people can do if they're speaking to businesses is talk about these sort of things, right? Being really scared about things and doing them anyway, trying to sort of make the most of like failure to go to the next thing, rather than saying you should all be really disciplined, because discipline is intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic, right? And you can't just decide to be disciplined one day. It has to be as a result of sort of other factors that you're taking in your life. So I do agree there was very clear transferables, but I think they come from like almost like a different layer of those skills than people sort of have written about or have charged businesses money for motivational speaking based on in the past, you know.
One I'd add in there, I reckon, is performing when you're not 100%, because sport, you are constantly never at 100%. So there's always
Did you
something.
ever feel like you were performing 100%? I never ever felt great on race day.
Do you know, really interestingly, I had this conversation and I actually said the days when I felt 100% were usually the day I got injured, and I then started to have warning signs when I actually felt 100%. I almost wanted to go out onto the field and be like, geez, my ankle feels horrible, or my right glute is just feeling slightly off. And I just needed something to almost wake me up from this trance. When I felt 100%, I guess arguably you probably overextend, and then that's actually why you cause an injury, right? But it was so weird that the days where I felt the most comfortable in my body, I would be sitting there going, oh my God, I don't know. I had warning signs. There were days where if I had, say, like a great night's sleep and I felt probably cognitively aware, but my body felt off, that was slightly different. I think being mentally tuned in and being mentally ready, like that can be a thing. But the whole transferable of an athlete to business, I think the opportunity grab to be someone who is resilient and able to perform when you're not at 100% is a huge land grab opportunity in the outer world now, when there's so many people, I think, that are really easy to glorify sort of the minor inconvenience in their life, which then allows them to take the easy option. And that, again, is probably a societal thing where we've given people too many easy options and easy outs. But what an opportunity for someone in sport to go, do you know what? If I am just feeling a little bit run down, maybe I had a few hours sleep because the kids kept me up last night, I can still get on with it because I've had tough days before. Like I'll find a way to perform.
You know what? You're really good insight, and I completely agree. And if I think back to this, like I got used to accepting that I was going to feel awful, horrendous, have terrible preparation for every major thing that mattered to me in sport. You know, like when I ran at the Olympic Games and I ran my best, and this is probably the case for every single great performance you've ever seen, right, in sport. No doubt that person had an awful night's sleep, was feeling a twinge, wasn't right. Something was, they were having an argument with their spouse or something offline beforehand. Like nothing ever goes well. And I know this because I've worked with other people who've won Olympic golds and you know, and I've been close to them and I know these stories. And actually, it's always the case. And if ever, there was probably a small handful of competitions I've done in my life where I felt great, and they were never my best competitions. Like never. You know, even looking at it in world records are generally run in athletics in the major championships. And they shouldn't be run then because in the major championships, they've had to do qualifying rounds and media commitments. And they should be running one-off meets. And they do happen sometimes. But generally speaking, you see these world records, these life-changing performances at the end of 3 qualification rounds back to back with lots of other stuff going on, with less than ideal sleep because they're staying in the Olympic Village where everyone's, you know, milling around and they've got cardboard beds or whatever they had, right? And so that's a really good point. And if I ever do any talks to businesses, I'm going to steal that from you, Lisk, and say, like, this is exactly it. When you show up in normal life, if you haven't been through that kind of sporting background, it's very easy to think that, like, hold on, this inconvenience or this problem is a reason for me to put this off or postpone this or change tact. And that actually feeds into like a lot of the work I do with startups. There's a very famous sort of trope in startups is you should launch too early. A lot of businesses fail because they're trying to be too perfect before they actually get out there and actually figure out what customers care about or not, and get the negative feedback and speak to the user, etc. And that's the same thing. Be willing to fail, be willing to take that risk, and be okay, be comfortable with uncomfortable like conditions for your launch. So yeah, good insight, mate, and I completely agree.
If you enjoyed that clip with Andrew, then you might enjoy the full unedited version of that episode. All you got to do is click right here. Go on, go now.